Look, I'm under no illusion that the majority of the liberal and progressive media incorrectly predicted this election, including myself. Many pundits and commentators on the mainstream media, especially CNN, are committing colossal amounts of hindsight bias in regards to the predictions of this election. I'm seeing a lot of liberals say that they saw this coming, that they saw this landslide victory coming for Donald Trump, and that's just not true. A lot of progressives still projected that Kamala Harris was going to win the election. And what I mean by hindsight bias is, if you don't know, it's a psychological phenomenon in which someone becomes convinced that they accurately predicted something to happen before it happened. A lot of liberals are saying, oh, these are the cracks in Harris's campaign all along. Like, we knew that this was a weakness in her campaign. No one said anything. No liberal media said it at the time. Progressives and leftists were sounding alarms toward the end of the campaign. And what this hindsight bias does is it gives someone a false confidence that they can accurately predict things in the future. For instance, liberal media is talking about what needs to happen, like what changes need to happen to the Democratic Party and to the future Democratic nominee's campaign. And that bias is really dangerous because it kind of clouds your vision and it doesn't allow you to see the facts for what they are. And if the mainstream media is pushing a narrative about what needs to change, and if that narrative about what needs to change for the Democratic Party is pushed loud enough for the Democratic Party to adhere to, that could spell future losses for the Democratic Party. Because what I've been hearing from the mainstream media over the past few days about why she lost is so far removed from the reality about why she truly lost. And I'm going to talk more about that in this video. So I'm going to talk about what went wrong for her campaign. Because clearly, if you lose the popular vote to someone who is a 34-time convicted felon, who is the only twice impeached president in U.S. history, someone who incited an insurrection on our nation's capital to prevent the peaceful transfer of power, someone who openly brags about sexually assaulting women, someone who was proven to be best friends with Jeffrey Epstein for over 10 years. Those scandals and the narratives surrounding those scandals would drown any other political candidate, would stop any candidate's campaign dead in its tracks, but not him. And that's super embarrassing for the Democrats, that they lost to that. So, changes need to happen, and they need to be drastic changes, quite frankly. I've been listening to independent media, mainstream media, commentators from all political persuasions over the past few days, giving their takes as to why Harris lost this election. I've heard everything from blaming the Democratic Party, blaming Kamala herself, putting the blame on the fact that she's a woman and that America isn't ready for a female president, all the way to blaming Israel and Russia for election interference. I've heard an array of reasons as to why she lost this election, and I wrote down every single thing that I thought were valid points. So I have a list of all the valid reasons, and there's a lot of them, why Harris lost this election. So I listed 10 reasons. There's a lot more. There's a whole lot of blame being thrown around right now, but here's what I think. And these are in no particular order of importance or ranking or anything. But the first reason I have is Joe Biden dropped out too late. So Harris only had about 3 months to campaign, whereas Trump announced he was running early last year. So his campaign honestly never really stopped after 2020, but technically started back early in 2023. And that's a huge factor, like people were expecting Biden to be the nominee. And then when things switched, Kamala all of a sudden was the head of the ticket. And it changes the perception, and you kind of have to restart gaining the trust of the public again after that. So Kamala had a tall task, having to gain the trust and to even, people really didn't even know who she was, right? Like she spent the first several weeks of her campaign telling voters, I know you don't know who, you might not know me super well, but here's my story, here's who I am. basically reintroducing herself. And that was, she kind of was behind. Although I think she had the momentum, like the vibes. I said in a previous video that the vibes shifted and there was a lot of enthusiasm around the Democratic Party. That was true, but it was also true that America as a whole didn't quite know what they were getting with a Harris presidency. I don't think it's a major reason why she lost the campaign, but it is a major reason why I think she started off kind of behind. The next reason, number 2, I think is one of the most important reasons why she lost. And if you listen to any left-wing media, this is one of their major critiques, and it's that, and they sounded this alarm months ago, or like a month or two ago. And the reason is Harris's campaign shifted to the right toward the last month of the campaign. She was campaigning with Liz and Dick Cheney, who of course are super right-wing conservatives. And Liz Cheney, conservative Republican, voted about 93% alongside Donald Trump when she was in office. And the reason why Kamala Harris was campaigning with these people, the Cheneys, was because they were anti-Trump Republicans. They obviously don't agree with the Democrats, anything policy-wise. The reason they were on Harris's side was because they believe that Trump is a threat to our democracy, because he tried to overthrow the results of the 2020 election, and that is extremely unconstitutional. And the Kamala Harris campaign decided to try to go and find those voters, which in hindsight was not a smart move, because the exit polls are showing us that Kamala Harris, in the end, did not pick up any extra Republican support than Biden did in 2020. 5% of registered Republicans voted for Joe Biden in 2020. In 2024, get this, only 4% of registered Republicans voted for Kamala Harris. And she spent the greater part of the last month of her campaign out there trying to reach those anti-Trump voters. And it did not pay off. If anything, it turned off the base of the Democratic Party, which is why Trump got about the same amount of votes he did in 2020, and Harris, in the end, will have about 7 million less votes than Biden did in 2020. So Harris's strategy to try to pick up support from anti-Trump Republicans backfired, because in the end, she got less Republican support than Joe Biden did. And while doing that, it turned off the base to the Democratic Party. 7 million or so less Democrats voted for Harris than they did Biden. It turns out there are not that many anti-Trump Republicans as the Harris campaign thought there were. So that was a fatal flaw in her campaign, in my opinion, was that she turned off her base. Kamala Harris, a Democrat, was out there campaigning and touting endorsements from Dick Cheney. Dick Cheney, the guy who almost solely got us into the Iraq War, a war that was based on devastating lies. It's one thing to say, hey, look, a Republican is endorsing us, and give some thumbs up or something. It's another thing to get on the stage with them, hold their hands up in the air and say, we're in this together. Yeah, I think that was a fatal flaw. I think in hindsight, she shouldn't have done that. Jen Psaki, who was Joe Biden's, I think, first White House press secretary, said this beautifully. She said, there was an over-listening to and over-lifting up of people who left Trump, not people who left the Democratic Party. Harris's campaign did not try to reel back in the people who left the Democratic Party, only the people who left Trump. And it turns out there's a lot more people who left the Democratic Party than who left Trump. The third reason why Trump won this was, and I believe this made a small impact, was Elon Musk. Now, Elon Musk, the world's richest man, was giving away $1 million every single day for the past several weeks or so to a random person that signs a petition to support the First and Second Amendment. Now, this is buying votes, if I've ever seen it. Elon Musk launches a $1 million a day lottery for people who sign his petition. Random ass Americans were winning $1 million each day just to sign this petition, which didn't do anything really. It's just a petition to give moral support to the First and Second Amendment, which is basically just signaling to the Republican Party and buying their vote. I mean, it's the Republicans who say that they're pro Second Amendment and pro First Amendment. Like, that's their whole shtick. But you're giving them money for supporting what Trump supports, and that creates some sort of connection between you and the Trump campaign. And look at these people. I believe this made a small impact on the electorate. I mean, I don't know how many millions of people probably signed this petition thinking, man, I could be a millionaire tomorrow. And look, the last couple of weeks of the election, random Americans became millionaires. If this is true, if he really gave them this money. But this gets at a deeper, much more menacing, troubling thing, and that is that this is the world's richest man, Elon Musk. Donald Trump chose Elon to be his biggest voice throughout pretty much his entire campaign. Do you think that Elon shifted this hard to the right to support Donald Trump because he agrees with him? Or do you think that he's trying to get some more tax cuts? Apparently, Volodymyr Zelensky, who is the president of the Ukraine, called Donald Trump the day after the election to congratulate him on his victory. And apparently Elon Musk was on that phone call with him. So it's pretty clear that Elon is going to have some sort of relationship with this second Trump administration. And that's scary because Elon is the richest man in the world, and he has a lot of fiscal and now political power. It might very well be the case that he could have some sort of power in this administration. The last thing we need in American politics is the world's richest man acting as a pseudo lobbyist within the administration, like basically lobbying for billionaires and lobbying for more tax cuts for people like himself, but with power. It makes you think, is he really looking out for middle class Americans? Is he really looking out for poor Americans by having his talking head of the campaign, Elon, be the richest man in the world who's looking out for himself? And so having the world's richest man not just travel the campaign with you and give speeches, but also give out millions of dollars to random Americans for supporting your cause, that's really corrupt. But is it illegal? I don't know. But there's no doubt that it had a little bit of an impact on people who voted for him. The fourth reason why Kamala lost was what I believe to be one of the biggest mistakes for Harris on the campaign trail. So Kamala was on The View about a month ago, and she was asked straight up, is there anything you can think of that you would do differently than Joe Biden, if she was to become president? And she said, I can't think of anything. I don't know if she freaked out and froze, or if she genuinely forgot what her advisors were telling her to say with these questions. The reason this is horrible is because Joe Biden's approval rating is not good and has not been good since he pulled us out of Afghanistan. His approval rating is really, really bad. And it's not for a lack of policy. It's because it's a lack of addressing the fundamental issues that are impacting the most Americans. Like, we've had, under the Biden administration, remember, we've had over 800,000 manufacturing jobs come back. We have record low unemployment. Biden passed the largest infrastructure bill in our nation's history. I can list 30 other good things that this administration has done, but there are some fundamental problems in our society that have not been touched on. 60% of Americans are still living paycheck to paycheck. Most Americans cannot afford an unexpected health bill or a car repair without going into debt. Groceries and everyday goods are still overpriced. And although investing in infrastructure and investing in green energy and bringing back a lot of manufacturing jobs, those are great things. But most Americans are still struggling. That's just the fact. Has our economy improved over the past few years? Of course. Biden's approval rating is really bad because of his age, because of his lack of addressing the fundamental issues in our country. Inflation was really bad 2 years ago, and thankfully we avoided a recession and we got through it and we're back down to normal inflation rates. But still, we all remember how bad inflation was 2 summers ago. In hindsight, I think that was still on the minds of voters. This is my main point. Kamala's strategy should have been to distance herself from Biden as much as possible during her campaign. There's a reason why Biden was swapped out for Kamala, and it wasn't just his age, believe me. His approval rating is really bad. If she didn't separate herself and show Americans, or at least convince them, that she would be a different candidate than Joe Biden was, that she would be different on policy, that she would be different on foreign affairs, she wasn't going to win. A lot of liberals thought that she was doing a good job at defending her accomplishments as vice president and showing the American people that she was different and that she would be different. But in this video, which was really kind of damning because the Republicans, they took this clip and they ran it on advertisements on TV all across the country, and basically was like, look, she's just going to be another Joe Biden. And his approval rating is bad, so people are going to be like, okay, we're not going to vote for her because most Americans don't support this person right now. I think this really changed the tide of the campaign.
Well, if anything, would you have done something differently than President Biden during the past 4 years?
There is not a thing that comes to mind in terms of, and I've been a part of most of the decisions that have had impact.
It's frustrating because for the first 2 months of her campaign, she talked about how she represents a new generation of leadership. That was her whole thing. This was her opportunity to distance herself, to show her the differences between her and Biden. She had several policy ideas that she talked about throughout the campaign. Increasing the child tax credit, giving first-time homebuyers a partial down payment, giving first-time business owners a tax credit, extending Medicare to include home care, going after corporate price gouging, which has been a major influence in the high cost of groceries. All of these policy ideas that would create real, tangible, positive change for Americans. She had that opportunity to say, this is, Biden, our administration, we didn't do this, but in my next administration, I will do this. Joe Biden did not extend the child tax credit, but I will do that. She had a golden opportunity here to express policy differences. She didn't have to say anything negative about Biden because, it's her administration too, but she could have listed several policies there, good ones that the Biden-Harris administration didn't focus on. And that would have been a perfect answer, would have been perfect. And instead, she said, I can't think of anything. A couple weeks later, Kamala came out and she basically said, that's not what I meant. Of course, I'm going to be a little bit different. Here are the things that are different. But it was too late. It was way too late. It was too far into the campaign, too close to Election Day, and Republicans already took it and ran with it and spent millions of dollars on TV ads with that clip in it, and it worked. It really worked. Okay, I think we're at number 5 now. Number 5 is that there was a global wave of anti-incumbency. This graphic that I found explains it very simply. Every governing party facing election in a developed country this year lost vote share, the first time this has ever happened. Every developed nation, including the G7, the NATO, all of those nations, Australia, England, Europe, all of them, every single country, the incumbent party, the political party that is currently in power, this year, if there was an election, that party either lost the election or they lost a significant vote share, which means that they lost a ton of support in the polling. What does this mean? We know that the global economy took a giant crap due to COVID. Inflation was up everywhere around the world. Every major economy was struggling. And believe it or not, the USA has been one of the strongest economies to recover from COVID. We are currently, even with our struggles right now, one of the, if not the strongest economy in the world. And we recovered the best from COVID. Like we recovered the quickest, got our economy and our GDP right back on track the quickest. But the point here is that during times of financial hardship, the incumbent party is usually blamed. And what we learned this year is that this is a phenomenon that is worldwide, right? So the incumbent party in every developed nation either lost the election this year, if there was one, or they lost a vote share this year, which is lost a percentage of support. It's a worldwide problem that economies are generally not doing good. And when that happens, the first person to be blamed is the political party that's in power. If you're struggling, blame the government. This is a factor that I heard almost nothing about all year long. I didn't know that every incumbency was losing giant swaths of support worldwide. I didn't know that was happening. And maybe the pollsters didn't see that either. And yeah, let's move on. My next point, number 6, I believe, is essentially, does policy actually matter anymore? I know that sounds ridiculous. And of course it does. Of course, good policy matters. But is it the most important thing now? Damn, I can't even believe that we're having to ask this question now. But it's a valid question because, look, Biden's approval rating, like I said earlier, wasn't good. One of the major reasons why it wasn't good was because the administration and mainstream media did a terrible job at communicating the wins that the Biden-Harris administration had. All of the good legislation that was passed during Biden's 4 years, people forget the great things that happened. The Biden administration passed giant pieces of legislation, including the largest investment in infrastructure in our nation's history, the CHIPS and Science Act, which brought back tons of technology jobs to the US, and not to mention that infrastructure bill that I just said. That bill alone created hundreds of thousands of construction jobs over the next 10 years. That's what that bill is doing. And the Biden administration brought back 800,000 manufacturing jobs. Trump lost 200,000 manufacturing jobs under his watch. Oh, and like I said earlier, like inflation is back down to normal rates. The unemployment rate is down, under 4% now. Like as of very recently, wages are increasing slightly faster than inflation. These are huge things. You almost certainly won't hear these accomplishments be broadcasted on Fox News or on really any conservative media for that matter. And that leads me to believe that policy matters, but only if you can communicate it well. Only if you can communicate your wins. And those accomplishments that I just listed are just a fraction of the accomplishments that this administration has. But they've done such a shitty job at communicating these wins that it doesn't matter because people are still convinced that things are horrible. People are still convinced that we aren't progressing, that we aren't getting better. When in fact, if you look at the data, if you look at the policy that's been pushed through over the past 4 years, shit's got a lot better. Now, not good enough, right? Like I said earlier, 60% of Americans are still living paycheck to paycheck. Most Americans, if they had an unexpected medical bill or an unexpected auto repair or anything like that, that would put them into debt. Yes, we have improved, but not enough. And that's kind of going back to one of my earlier points, is that we've made progress, but Americans are still struggling with the same struggles that we have for the past 100 years. And that is the vast wealth and income inequality between the corporations, the rich and the elite, the billionaire class, and the middle and lower class. And our political system continues to serve the elites and the billionaires and the corporations. Going back to the main point here, does policy truly matter? And the answer is yes, but only if you can communicate it to the American people. Only if you can convince the electorate that the legislation that you have passed has tangible positive effects, positive changes to our lives. The Biden administration did not communicate that well, and this all leads to number 7, which is kind of the same thing as number 6. Bernie Sanders, the famous senator from Vermont, dropped this bomb on Twitter the other day. I won't read the whole letter that he wrote, but essentially he sums it up pretty well in this description. Bernie said, "It should come as no great surprise that a Democratic Party which has abandoned working class people would find that the working class has abandoned them." While the Democratic leadership defends the status quo, the American people are angry and want change. When Bernie says that the Democratic Party has abandoned the working class, what he means is that the number one reason why things don't change in politics, in our government, is big money. He's referring to the fact that most of our government officials at the federal level take in hundreds of thousands and sometimes millions of dollars from lobbyist organizations, often corporate lobbyists, such as big tech, big pharma, the Israel lobby, oil lobbyists. It's basically legal bribery. Our politicians are being offered millions of dollars in exchange for the support of the interest of the corporations, in support of the interest of whatever the lobbyists are lobbying, right? And this inevitably hurts the middle and working class. This has been Bernie's whole shtick for the past 50 years. And he says at the end there, while the Democratic leadership defends the status quo, the American people are angry and want change. So the status quo he's talking about is the fact that a majority of Americans have been living paycheck to paycheck for as long as he's been alive. That's the status quo. The status quo is not address the fundamental issues of our economy. In Bernie's view, the only way to overcome this systemic economic oppression of the middle and working class is to uproot it with social policy, taking power away from the corporations, away from big money interests, and giving it back to the people. Although I believe the Biden-Harris administration the past 4 years has passed some very positive legislation that has had a real impact on our lives, Bernie's saying here, it's not enough. It doesn't change the status quo. It might give you a little breathing room, but it doesn't change the fact that our system is still not working for us. It doesn't change the fact that our economic and political systems favor the rich. It's just true. Bernie's point right here is that it's no surprise that the Democratic Party, which he says has abandoned the working class, has now been abandoned by the working class. Okay, moving on. Okay, the next point is that Kamala Harris didn't technically win the nomination from the American people. When Biden decided to drop out, immediately people were asking for an open primary so that Democratic candidates could battle for the nomination and the American people would get to choose the nominee. Just hours after announcing that he wasn't running in 2024, he endorsed Kamala Harris to be the nominee when she wasn't the one who won the nomination for the Democratic Party. Joe Biden did. So Biden endorsed Kamala immediately, and one thing leads to another. Next thing you know, Kamala all of a sudden is the nominee. In retrospect, the American people probably felt like Kamala wasn't the legitimate nominee. Now, eventually, she did get the support of all of the delegates, but it wasn't through an open primary, which a lot of people asked for. In my opinion, I think a key reason why Democratic voter turnout was low in this election was because the American people, and specifically Democrats, didn't feel like they had a voice in their choice in the nominee. And let's say there was an open primary. Let's say Kamala and 5 or 6 other Democrats ran an open primary. Let's say Kamala came out on top and she won the support from the Democratic voters. That would have increased her support from the base. And instead, a lot of Democrats got turned off because they felt like the Democratic Party chose the nominee and not the American people. And that is a huge deal. I can't put a number to exactly how many Democratic voters this turned off. I can't be like, because Kamala didn't win an open primary, 4 million Democrats decided to stay home instead of go vote for her. I don't know. I don't know how many, but I know it's a big deal. Now, I wanted to save these last two because these two reasons are actually false. These two reasons are what I'm hearing on mainstream media right now about why they think Kamala lost. I'm hearing on CNN that Kamala was too woke. People are saying that calling Latinos Latinx turned off people. They are saying that Kamala spent too much time talking about trans rights. There's a litany of critiques from mainstream CNN about Kamala being too progressive, and that's why she lost. That is straight up bullshit. Like, I never even heard her say the word Latinx. I never even heard her talk about trans issues. Calling Kamala Harris too progressive is like calling Victor Wembanyama too short. Like what are you talking about? She was out there campaigning with Liz Cheney. She was saying things like, we want the most lethal fighting force in the world. The entire last month of her campaign was virtue signaling to the right, trying to pull anti-Trump voters to her coalition. What are you talking about? We all know what things are woke. And Kamala didn't talk about any of that stuff. So labeling her campaign as too progressive or too woke is just stupid. It's just dumb. And the final reason, which is also extremely dumb, people are blaming Kamala and her team for picking Tim Walz as her vice presidential nominee. I think people are blaming her for bringing a true progressive to the ticket. It's just not true at all that he was the reason for the loss. Between the 4 main people on the presidential ticket, so Kamala Harris, Tim Walz, Donald Trump, and J.D. Vance, between all 4 people, Tim Walz was the most popular. He had the highest favorability rating out of all 4. Tim Walz is one of the most successful governors in our nation's history. Tim Walz has passed some of the most consequential legislation in Minnesota with only a 1-seat majority in the state legislature. He has base policy. He's a gun owner, a Midwestern dad, a hunter. He codes as a moderate. He only helped this ticket. But when people blame Tim Walz for this loss, they're shutting their brains off. And yeah, those are just 10 reasons of the many why Kamala Harris lost to Donald Trump in this election. I'll just finish by saying thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe, leave a comment. If you like this content, share it with someone who might like it. And yeah, thank you.